So I want to talk about psychopaths, and one reason I want to talk about them is, look, I'm fascinated by them. I mean, a lot of people are. Most people have seen movies about them and so on, and they attack big audiences. How can they possibly do the things they do? Is just an interesting question to me, and I think to a lot of people. They're also illuminating for the limits of human nature. Humans care about each other. Well, maybe not everybody, and for the limits of morality. Well, wait, if they, don't even understand what they're doing and why it's wrong, then, do they really have the obligations? And we can't convince them that it really is wrong, then does that say something about our being justified in our normal views? And we'll talk about law and responsibility. But there's also a practical side to it, which is that they're very costly. Less than 1% of the population. Some people say 0.5%, some people say closer to 1%, but somewhere in there. In the US at least, US and Canada, 15 to 20% of medium security prisoners. Higher security is going to be a higher rate of psychopathy, lower would be lower. But in juvenile, it's much higher, 37%, because you don't get put in juvie unless you've done something pretty bad. And they commit many more offenses of all kinds. You could think, you put it all together and they commit over 30% of the violent crime in the US. I wish I had the numbers for Chile, but I couldn't find them. And I asked a few people, but certainly over 30% of the violent crime. So you can make a big difference. That costs about $250 billion a year in the US alone. Compared to schizophrenia, 4 times the cost, the annual cost, but less than, say, alcohol abuse. So it's in there among the most important topics. We really want to look at it carefully and try to understand it. I realize that I'm standing between you and lunch. And so I thought I would put my entire talk in terms of food. We're going to have an appetizer, who are psychopaths. We're going to have a salad course, are they responsible? We're going to have a main course, do they make moral judgments? And then we're going to have a little dessert about what should be done. And I want you to know that the entire feast will be vegetarian. Okay, so nice appetizers, huh? They're all vegetarian. Who are psychopaths? So here are two guys. Okay, let's imagine that somebody invited a friend along to dinner, and it was one of these two. Who would be happier if it was the one on the left? Who would be happier if it was the one on the right? Okay, she's the winner. The one on the right. The one on the left is Pedro Alonso Lopez, who was called the monster of the Andes and raped and killed over 300 people. The reason he got away with it so much was they were namely native people, and so they disappeared and nobody knew. But you don't want to have dinner with him. This guy on the right is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, won several teaching awards, gave $45 million to charity, and so on. And so, he actually gave his liver to a stranger. I mean, he's like the nicest guy, although I had dinner with somebody. No, anyway, he might be boring, who knows? Because, one reason you would want to have dinner with a psychopath is this first factor here. This is the official diagnostic category. There are 20 different items. Each item gets 0, 1, or 2. If you get 30 or above, you are officially a psychopath. But of course, it's a continuum. There are 29s and there are 31s. But the reason that people want to have dinner with them is that they're superficially charming, and so they kind of, they seem like nice people, but then it turns out they're just manipulating you. And they're pathological liars. That means they lie for no particular reason, just for fun. They like to lie. And they also have a grandiose sense of self-worth. The one that really distinguished psychopaths is this group of factors over here: lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, lack of empathy, failure to accept responsibility. Like, it's not my fault, she did it. And so those are the more emotional traits and really distinguish psychopaths from kind of other people who do horrible things. And this is, by the way, it's tied to the uncinate fasciculus, very highly correlated with activity in that particular brain area. Then the others are behavioral, need for stimulation. They take a lot of drugs, never get addicted, but they take a lot of drugs. Parasitic lifestyle, they'll get engaged to you and let you pay the rent before the wedding and then walk out a week before. Lack of realistic long-term goals. Impulsivity, we just heard about impulsivity earlier this morning. That's one of the features. Irresponsibility, they don't pay their bills, take care of their children, and so on. These are poor behavioral controls, but early behavior problems, juvenile, so that's like before 12 to 18, and then criminal versatility is a good one. To really be versatile, you have to do 6 different types of crimes. There's a long list I won't show you, but you have to do 6. So if all you do is murder a bunch of people, you're not a psychopath, right? Because you haven't shown variety. You've got to do fraud, and you've got to do kidnapping, and you've got to do escape from prison, and you got to do a lot of different things in order to be a true psychopath. And promiscuous sexual behavior. I will add many marital relations. This was all developed by Bob Hare in the 90s, and he's from Canada. So up there, it's a civil marriage relationship, which means living together with certain type of dependency for 6 months. So those are the factors, right? And that gives you a kind of a general diagnosis. So I'll stop there. Are there any quick questions about what psychopaths are in general? Because now we're going to turn and focus on responsibility. Any questions? Yeah?
You mentioned one of the markers of psychopathy was lack of empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
And from what I understand, there's also the view that they have actually a lot of empathy, that they are able to cause a lot of pain, be very cruel, because they have the ability to think about what the other is thinking.
Oh, good point. Very good. So let's distinguish cognitive empathy, which is the ability to read other people's minds, from affective empathy. When you feel pain, I feel pain. When you feel sad, I feel sad. What they lack is the second. However, because they're very low on fear themselves, they're very bad at detecting fear in other people. But they learn to see the external signs. And so actually, when we get back to the treatment at the end, I'll bring up an example of that. There are some deficits, but generally they can be good. That's why they're so manipulative. Number 5 there, because they can read other people's minds, but they don't share the feelings. That's the lack of empathy they're talking about there.
Just quick follow-up. Do they intellectualize the emotions then? Instead of they don't feel the empathy, so but this is convenient for me, so they go through a process of intellectualizing the emotions?
So it depends. In Bob Hare's book, Without Conscience, which is a great book and I highly recommend, he tells the story of one person that he interviewed, and he said, so the guy goes, am I a psychopath? He goes, yeah. And he goes, what does that mean? And he gets to the point about empathy. He says, well, it's like you care about other people. Only fools care about other people. Why should you do that? So some of them, that's their attitude. But others say, I really wish I did. And now do you believe them? The problem is, how do you know what they're really feeling? Okay. Are they responsible? Now, there can be moral responsibility and legal responsibility. So I'm going to say a few words about moral responsibility and then focus on legal, because these people are almost all in prison, and so that's the real practical issue. But moral responsibility, I think there are different kinds. One is just what's called, this is David Shoemaker and others have drawn this distinction, attributability. So an act's attributable to a person, And that's one sense of them being responsible for the act. If the fact that they did the act justifies ascribing some character trait, like they're a bad person, right? And in that sense, it's clear these people are bad people, right? They have vices, right? So in that sense, there's no question they're responsible, in my view at least. I'm perfectly happy to talk about it, but that's my assumption from here. The real question is, are they accountable? That's a different type of responsibility. So a person's accountable for an act if the act justifies them feeling remorse, other people feeling anger, and other people blaming them, right? We talked about blame before. So the main philosophical accounts of accountability, or theories of accountability, one is second order coherence. This is the Harry Frankfurt's famous view that you are responsible if you have a second order endorsement. Like I'm acting on this desire and I'm glad I have that desire and I'm glad I'm acting on it. There's very little evidence that psychopaths have any second order. They don't even think about whether it's good for them to have these desires or not, except in an instrumental way. You know, is this going to help me achieve my first order desires? But we're going to focus instead on accountability because on reasons responsiveness as a theory of accountability, largely because Federico was talking about it and I wanted to tie into the earlier talk here. So on this account, you have accountability responsibility if you're responsive to reasons. And to be responsive to reasons means when you have a reason to do something, you're aware of it. And when you have a reason not to do something, you're aware of it. That's being receptive to reasons, okay? But the other thing you have to be is reactive. That when you know you have a reason to do it, you act on it. And when you know you have a reason not to do it, you don't do it. And so they're two different parts. And despite the impulsivity, the main emphasis in discussions of psychopaths being responsible has not been on whether they're reactive, but on whether they're receptive, whether they're even aware that they have reasons. And that fits in with the legal system as well. So there's no question that psychopaths are responsible. They intentionally do the act. You know, when he dragged that woman down, he was doing that intentionally. It wasn't like an accident. He didn't fall over. He was doing it intentionally, and he knew he was dragging her, okay? But so why would they not be responsible? Only because of something akin to or similar to an insanity defense. So let's look at insanity defenses. In the United States, this was the 1957. In 1982, they got rid of this or to conform this conduct to their, most jurisdictions did. But the one that we're going to focus on was retained. So there's still many jurisdictions where a person's not responsible if they, as a result of mental disease, psychopathy being one, he lacks substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of the conduct. They added or criminality, and that in some jurisdictions put it that way instead of wrongfulness. But a lot of jurisdictions say you have to appreciate the wrongfulness. And that's being receptive to moral reasons, right? Notice this other phrase is being reactive to reasons, whether you can conform. So the law actually mirrors the philosophical theory. Scotland, person's not criminally responsible if the person was unable by reason of mental disorder to appreciate the nature. Again, right? So it's inability to appreciate. And in Scotland, they specifically say, they actually say this in the notes of the Model Penal Code in the US, that the concept of appreciation is wider than that of knowledge. It's like some people, you know it, but you don't appreciate it. And we'll focus on that, so we'll come back to that. I wanted to say that's explicit in Scotland. I wanted to add Germany because there are people here in Chile studying moral perception. And in Germany, if you're incapable of seeing the injustice, then you're not responsible. And so they actually put it in terms of moral perception. So I thought some of you might find that interesting. Now, why would they have that? Why would you say, well, you're not responsible unless you appreciate the wrongfulness of what you're doing? Well, one reason is that it's a criminal law. And one of the differences between the criminal law and the civil law, it's like if you get a speeding ticket, well, the speed limit could have been higher, could have been lower. It's malum prohibitum. It's only wrong because it's prohibited. Whereas malum in se is when it's wrong in itself. And that's the criminal law. And so in the civil law, you're not held responsible for breaking it if you don't know it's prohibited. But in the mala in se, it's like you have to know that it's wrong in itself. And so if you don't appreciate that, you're missing some of the justification for punishing you under the criminal law. My other, which I mentioned to somebody just earlier, my other example is, why do we excuse like 5-year-old kids? Like, I don't know if your kids have ever done this to you, but you won't let them have a third dessert and they go, I hate you, Daddy. Well, now, what are they doing? They're trying to manipulate you in order to get what they want by saying words that they specifically know will cause as much damage to you as possible. That's what they're doing, right? And yet, we don't hold them responsible. We don't think that shows anything about them deserving anger or blame, maybe a little anger, but no blame, or they don't have to feel remorse because they don't understand it, right? And the third consideration that I'll throw out, I'm not sure whether it's really an argument, but I used to wonder, like, E equals MC squared. How many people believe that's true? E equals MC squared. How many people can explain it? I mean, I know C is the speed of light and you square it, but why do you square it instead of cube it? How come it's, M instead of, why don't you square M instead of the C? I don't know. And so because I know it's true, but I don't really understand it or appreciate it, I'm not held responsible for failing to apply it in particular cases properly, right? Because in order to apply it, you've got to appreciate it. You can't just know it as an abstract proposition. And that's the kind of idea with these people. They might know as an abstract proposition that rape is wrong. If you ask them, is rape wrong? They go, yeah. But do they really appreciate what's wrong about it or how wrong it is? So if you apply it to psychopaths, then you get, if psychopaths lack this appreciation, which I'm calling attitudinal, it's about an attitude, you don't appreciate the moral wrongfulness of their acts, then they should be eligible for a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity, and maybe even not morally responsible, at least under some jurisdictions and some theories, right? We're going to talk about whether that's true. That's why I have the question marks on there. They do lack that appreciation. Therefore, they should be eligible for not guilty by reason of insanity, which means they don't go to prison. They're still locked up in a mental institution, but they're not found guilty. And so that's the argument that we want to kind of overall look at. And I'll come back to whether this is, but before that, I'll say, if there are any questions about that, about the standards for moral and legal responsibility that we want to apply. Okay. You going to tell us about moral perception?
No, not really. I was thinking about the distinction between appreciating that such and such is the case, understanding that such and such is the case, and knowing that such and such is the case. Because in all the different jurisdictions that Scottish one, the German one, the one available in different states of the United States, there seems to be a strong commitment to internalist forms of justification or accessibility.
Absolutely. But to be fair, I picked those jurisdictions for that reason.
Okay.
If you go to England, the Monotone rules, it's just no. It's not appreciator.
Okay, so that's my
It's not universal.
That's my question, because there seems to be like an internal requirement here operating,
Yes.
which might not be endorsed by some philosophers, certainly in the case of justification and knowledge.
Right. Which is, oh wait, didn't I? Yeah. So these bits were supposed to be arguing in favor of those, even though other people disagree with them. That's what these arguments were meant to do.
Okay. Okay.
But obviously, there's a lot more to be said.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions about? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a brief one. I was wondering if the things you will continue to talk about will still hold if the ground for punishability was not the INSEE view.
If you don't require appreciation of the wrongfulness, then the things I'm going to go on and talk about just won't apply.
Okay, thank you.
At least in the next section. But when we get to desert, then you'll see that it would still have some implications.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. So main course, do psychopaths make moral judgments? So the classic view is they make moral judgments. They know what they're doing is wrong. They just don't care about it. It's like driving the speed limit. In the United States, nobody drives the speed limit. It says 55, everybody's going 65. And the reason is they know the cops won't stop them if they're going along with the rest of the traffic. Is that true in Chile? Yeah, okay. I think it's certainly true in the UK and in Australia. I've tried a bunch of different places. So they think psychopaths view it as kind of like the law. They know, it's illegal to go over 55, but they don't care because they're not going to get caught, they think. And so they just go ahead and do it anyway. So the deficit is not in their judgment, it's in their motivation. But the other view is that they don't really make real moral judgments at all. They just kind of mouth the words that they know other people say, but they don't believe them. It's called inverted commas. Like, in Catholicism, abortion is wrong, right? And it's like, I'm not endorsing that. I'm just saying that's what people say, And if you're a Catholic, then you might even not have to add in Catholicism. You just say abortion is wrong. But all you really mean is, in this community it is. And you don't really mean it is, from your personal point of view. You might even deny it. But nonetheless, they pretend to make normal moral judgments because they want to manipulate you. They want to be in with the group and they know you believe it, right? And so they go along with it. And recall, of course, they're pathological liars and they're cunning and manipulative, typically. They don't have to always be because you just need to get over 30, but almost all of them are, okay? So how do you know whether to believe them or not? That was the problem that we faced in the lab. I worked with the prisons in New Mexico and Wisconsin. Kent Keel runs the lab, who did the interview, runs the lab in New Mexico. And our problem was, how do we know whether they really believe what they're saying or they're just mouthing the words to manipulate us and, get a lighter sentence? So I turned to my colleagues over here, Keith Payne and Daryl Cameron at Chapel Hill. Keith is an expert in implicit racial attitudes. So most people know, of course, that many people who are sincerely, explicitly not racist, when you ask them, they really believe, you should not treat people of different races any different, or not sexist. You should not treat people of different genders any different. I really sincerely believe that. They still might have these implicit racial biases against blacks, against women, against whatever group you want to put. And there have been a lot of different tests, the IAT, the IAMP, but what we used was the process dissociation procedure, which Keith did. For reasons, if you want to talk about how bad the IAT is, let me know. And I'll tell you why we went with this one. But the idea is that just as you can sincerely be not explicitly racist, you might explicitly know that an act is wrong, but not have an implicit moral attitude that goes along with it. You go, oh yeah, it's wrong to speed. I don't really believe it, but yeah, okay. But I'm going to say it because, and so you don't really feel what's wrong. So we did, I'm about to tell you about the test that we used, but we did it in North Carolina during a gay marriage referendum where they were legalizing gay marriage. And we found that people who voted to legalize gay marriage actually had a strong attitude against gays, and people who voted to stop gay marriage had no such attitude. They just wanted to be a member of the community that was doing that. And so the explicit and the implicit don't always go together. But if one what I want to say is if you lack the implicit attitude that it's wrong, then you don't really appreciate its wrongfulness. You're just saying it's like equals MC squared. I know it's true. I just don't appreciate it maybe because I don't understand it, although understanding and appreciation are different. Okay? So the big question now is going to be, do psychopaths lack implicit moral attitudes? And here's how we studied it with what's called a sequential priming task, and a process association procedure was the method of analysis. So you start with words, and you need 3 groups of words. You need words that are names of acts that are wrong: murder, rape, theft, assault. And you test before that people agree that they're wrong, and 98% do. Then words that are neutral, and you writing, baking, painting, tennis, golf, and you make sure they don't think it's wrong. We ran into trouble with golf because some people thought it was wrong because of its environmental, and so, but then you take that one out when you're testing that person, okay? But then what you want is words that are emotional, but not morally wrong, like cancer, trauma, disaster, maybe dementia, and so it's, it could be a negative thing emotionally, because you want to see whether the moral judgment is separate from the mere emotional reaction, okay? So you've got those 3 groups of words. Then what you do is you give them the prime word for 100 milliseconds. We tried 50, we tried 30, we tried 150 milliseconds, so you varied, but just as an example, 100 milliseconds. Then you get a little bit of blank screen, and then you get the target word, and we varied the deadline so we could see how much control they had, because they're going to have more control at 800 milliseconds than at 400. They've just got more time. And sure enough, that all got confirmed. And the instructions are simply ignore the prime word. Is the target word wrong? That is, does it name an act that is wrong? So just as an example, if you say painting tennis, then you say, ignore painting, is tennis wrong? And people will say, no, it's not wrong. But wait a second, each trial is less than a second. So there's still like 20% of the time they're messing up and pushing the wrong button. So they're 20% of the time they're saying tennis is wrong, right? But if you go theft, tennis, and 40% of the time they say it's wrong. And it's that difference between the 20% and the 40% that's the signal we're looking for. Because that means that they were thinking wrong during the prime period, and they were told to ignore it, but they're not capable of just ignoring it. And so they end up saying it's wrong more often when it's a wrong word followed by a neutral word, as opposed to a neutral word followed by a neutral word. And in fact, if it's a negative word like cancer followed by tennis, it's still down there like 25%. It's still below the 40 that you get for the wrongness, right? So there's a little bit of an increase, but there's still a difference between the negative words and the wrong words, okay? So there were different conditions. I basically said that, when it's congruent, when it's, a wrong word followed by a wrong word, or a neutral word followed by a neutral word, it's incongruent when it's a wrong. And what you're looking for is the difference. I can show you the calculations we did if you're interested, but I took that slide out to save time. When it's a wrong word followed by a neutral word versus a neutral word followed by a neutral word is really the contrast we're most interested in. And the results, we used the Levinson self-report psychopathy scale, which was patterned off the PCLR that I showed you. It's a lot easier to administer, a lot shorter. And those scores were, in fact, significantly associated with the reduced prime. So instead of 20 to 40, when your psychopathy score is very low, it's 20 to 50. And when your psychopathy score is very high, it's 20 to 30, right? So there's just there's less impact of the word murder before the word tennis for people who are high in psychopathy because they don't have an implicit attitude against murder. And notice, by the way, this is all happening with under a second, so they can't control it. They can't fake it. And furthermore, they don't know what we're doing, and so they can't fake it. And psychopathy scores just were not associated with, on the negative primes like cancer or the neutral primes like, baking followed by tennis. It wasn't associated with accuracy on the negative, how often they got the right answer, whether it was wrong or not wrong in the second rate, which takes into consideration when the wrong word might be the target instead of the prime, or on control. So it didn't have any impact. There was no difference between the 400 millisecond and the 800 millisecond trials. I can show you the data in more detail if you want, but I thought I'd leave the technical bits out. So for now, the empirical conclusion that I would draw, at least, is that we need more research. And of course, we've done more research. We've tried the AMP, we've tried the IAT, we've tried a bunch of different things. We're actually now doing an approach avoidance task, which is, I think, very promising, but we don't have data on it yet, or at least not reliable data. But I still think so far the evidence suggests that when psychopaths give moral responses, they say, yes, rape is wrong, right? They make only inverted commas. They go, they're really just going, yeah, of course. It's kind of like a non-believing Catholic saying abortion is wrong, right? It's like, I want to be in with this community, but I don't really feel it, And so they're not making real moral judgments. They've got the words, but not the music. And as a result, they lack appreciation. If appreciation is defined as not just believing it, but appreciating it, then they don't have that. So if according to the legal standards, right, then you need appreciation in order to be responsible, then they should be not responsible, found not guilty by reason of insanity. Whether you call it insanity or not is another question, but you should be found not guilty if you're not responsible. Standard principle in US law, European law, I assume Chilean law. But the different words make a difference when you start translating them into different languages. And so I'm not sure. I should have looked that one up, but I didn't. So any questions about that? Yeah? Oh, wait, I think we have a microphone here. Yeah.
¿Se habla así? Oh. I just don't understand if they don't have implicit moral attitudes about what in general is considered to be wrong, it means that they don't have, or maybe, no, sorry, I start to formulate it again. So if they don't have these implicit moral attitudes against what is wrong, so maybe they could have some sort of explicit moral attitudes that consider that those things that we generally consider to be wrong are not wrong, but they don't communicate them because they know that it's not in general what is socially acceptable. So how do you know that they don't have this explicit...
Very good question. This test will not show you that. It's possible that they really do think it's not wrong, but they don't tell you, or they just don't even think about whether it's wrong or not. Right? So they hold no view one way or the other. And this test will not decide between those two.
Again?
I was remembering this study about making the conventional moral distinction. So you present psychopaths vignettes about conventional transgression, like chewing gum at school, something like that, against theft or stealing.
Right,
stuff.
the Altorial, Smetana, and Nucci test.
Yes, so they treat conventional transgression, moral transgression, as conventional transgressions. So some people say that from this, one can infer that they don't possess moral concepts, but they still understand moral transgression, what we know as moral transgression, as conventional transgressions.
Right.
So they still have some knowledge about that this
Right.
is not supposed to be done here. No? So I don't know. That suggests to me that the lack of motivation seems to be an issue here. As
That
well.
certainly was taken to suggest that. Neil Levy made a similar argument. Those studies were done by James Blair. And there are two problems. One is he only had 8 people into that study.
I have no idea.
And the second problem was he didn't do what you said. They raised the conventional ones to the moral level and said, it's independent. You're just not supposed to wear pajamas to work. And even if the boss says it's okay, it's still wrong. Which suggests that they're trying to show that they really are standing up for the right side. But in the end, we weren't convinced, and so we tried it out with 106, I think, inmates in the prisons in New Mexico, and the results did not replicate.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's a good question. I wanted to check it out because it would matter a lot. Yeah.
Just a quick question, perhaps you will address this issue later, but assuming that they lack moral implicit attitudes, what would be the best empirically based theory regarding why they lack those implicit attitudes? Do we have like data, neuroanatomical data, cultural data regarding why that actually
Right.
takes place?
So one thing is, the first thing you want to look at is genes. And S.E. Vidding in London did 3,500 pairs of twins, and in order to do a standard thing, and found out that it was 70% heritable in men. The psychopathy score is 70% heritable, which means there's some influence of environment. So if a psychopath is born to a wealthy family, they're not going to knock over convenience stores. They got plenty of money, but they still want to get thrills, so they'll go jumping out of airplanes with parachutes. And so you're going to have behavioral differences depending, but 70% heritable in the genes. And then which genes are they? We don't know. No one has been able to determine that yet, although we've got the data and I'm trying to get it. But what it does in terms of the cell structures, the genes affect the cell structures, and the cells in the paralimbic system, throughout the paralimbic system, are involved in all those different 20 items. And the paralimbic system was so named by Burdman because it shares a certain kind of cell structure. So the best answer I can give is probably maybe the best guess would be that there's actually a genetic variation that leads to malformed cells within those structures, which can be tested by voxel-based morphometry about the sizes of, and so on. Very high prediction value there. So it looks like it's actually like a brain disease, and the brain disease leads to this behavior.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Microphone.
Okay.
No, for you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Could you say a bit more about what the connection is between having these implicit moral attitudes and the idea of appreciating the wrongness of the acts?
Yeah, the connection is, that's what I call it. I mean, really, it's like, I don't know other people who draw that, but there is this notion of appreciation, and you ask, what does it mean? And Scotland doesn't tell you, Germany doesn't tell you, the US doesn't tell you, and I've looked all through the legal records and they don't tell you what it is. But that's typical, like, what exactly is due process, in the US Constitution? Well, they like these vague words and then they get applied in the courts. So nobody really tells you what appreciation is. So it's a hypothesis of mine. I'm suggesting that we don't understand what it is. We need to understand what it is. Here's one way to understand it. Tell me if you've got a better way. That's the connection.
Great.
It's all in my mind. We published this article a few years ago, and I haven't heard anybody give me a better account of what they mean by appreciation. Okay? Good. Dessert. You've been waiting for dessert. How much time do I have left here? Okay, I've got like 15 minutes.
Well, it's up to you, really. But ideally, we would leave more time for Q&A.
Oh no, I meant including the Q&A. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. This I'll do 5 minutes here.
Great.
So what are we going to do? So they're not responsible. Does that mean you just put them out on the street? I mean, you could do that, but if you just put them back out on the street, they're going to kill people. I mean, you don't want to do that, right? So you could find them guilty and just punish them as usual. But now you've got to give up a very deep principle in the criminal law that you should not criminally punish people who are not responsible, and that responsibility requires, these kinds of items. Another thing is, they're diminished. We want a graded notion, right? It's not all the way. It's just part of the way. They're diminished responsibility, but then they get out sooner, and then they're going to kill people because this syndrome does not change over the course of life. They do less violent crimes later on, largely because they can't run as fast or hit as hard, But if you give them a reduced sentence, there's going to be more crime. So you could find them not guilty by reason of insanity, and confine them in some kind of psychiatric facility. No, you don't want that. I mean, just imagine that your teenage child gets schizophrenia and gets put in an institution with a psychopath as a roommate. I mean, they're just going to take advantage of these people and mistreat them horribly, right? So you don't want to just put them in a normal kind of mental institution. So the suggestion is you can find them not guilty by reason of insanity and then confine them in a separate facility. I don't care whether it's within the prison walls, but you keep them separated from the other people because they're dangerous to those other people. Another advantage here is the guards know who the psychopaths are, and they know you treat them differently, right? And in fact, the prison psychiatrist also knows who the psychopaths are, and now they can treat them differently. And here's why that's important. If you want to treat them, then this is the probability of violent failure, which means these people committed a violent crime. Do they commit another one? And just before they leave the prison, 6 months before, they start doing group therapy with the other inmates. And this system for the, so the non-psychopaths are the orange here, yeah? And so you can see they went down from 40% recidivism to like 20%. Group therapy worked, sharing your feelings with other people and so on. Psychopaths, 60% right? And they went up to 80. Whoa, like giving them group therapy makes them worse. And why is that? Well, it's not clear, but I love anecdotes, and so I'll tell an anecdote. One of them, they asked when they came back, they said, so you're back really soon, but you had this group therapy. Like, did you learn anything in the group therapy? Oh yeah. I learned something in the group therapy. What did you learn? And he literally said, I learned that people care about their sisters. It never occurred to me. And now I realize that I could manipulate this person by threatening their sister. And so he's just discovering new ways to commit crimes. And the group therapy doesn't do anything, but it might drive the rate up because they think they've got new ways of doing it. So you don't want to treat these people like the rest of the prison population, okay? The only person who's ever figured out a way to treat psychopaths is Michael Caldwell. In the 90s, he was given a bunch of money by the governor of Wisconsin, and he turned it into a treatment program at the Mendota Juvenile Correctional Facility. I can tell you more about the program if you want later, but the important thing for our purposes is that, let's just look at the 2-year follow-up. Oh, by the way, they only had like 100 beds in the treatment facility, so they could randomly assign 100 people got into the program, 100 people didn't get into the program. And then they could look at, and these were juveniles, I think 14 to 18, if I'm correct. It might have been 14 to 16, but in any case, we have the comparison class and the treatment class, violent failure, 43.5% of the people, these were bad kids that got into this program. And 43.5% had a violent crime within 2 years. And with the treated program, it was only 20%. So you cut in half the amount of violent recidivism. But the important thing also is that you reduce the severity of the violent, because violent failure can come in, everything from murder to assault. And in the group, these were bad kids. These were kids that were moved into this program because no other prison would take them. They go, get these kids out of here. They are just causing trouble. We can't have a riot, And so they're in the 10% of the comparison group were convicted of homicides within 2 years. So, right, 10%, 100 people. So 10 people, 16 deaths, 16 homicides in the untreated group, 0 in the treated group. So you just saved 16 lives, right, by treating them this way. Maybe I will say a word, if I've got just a minute, about what the program is. What you got to think about is, how do you train your kids to be good, right? And one way to do it is to say, if you don't do that, I'm going to punish you. Psychopaths don't have fear, and so that doesn't work. You can say, oh, look what you did to your little brother. Don't you feel bad about that? And they go, no. And then they go, I'm your parent. You have to listen to me. And they go, I'm got a grandiose self-image. You're a schmuck, right? And so none of those work. But the other thing you can do is you can do positive reinforcement for good behavior. So when Caldwell and these kids, they've been mistreated by the prison system. When they show up in his system, he goes, what do you like to do? And some go, I like to watch TV, or I like to play ping pong, or I like to, lift weights or whatever. And he goes, you can do that if you get enough points. And here's how you get points. And it's very explicit. And if they think they're not getting points they deserve, they can go and complain. And so it's all treating them with respect, and here's how you get your points. And the first 6 months it does no good, but by the end of the year you get results like these. So I can go into more detail if you want. I actually put the whole program on a slide back there. But my tentative conclusions before we turn to questions are, I don't think psychopaths make moral judgments, at least not the way we do. They don't appreciate them. They're only kind of pretending to endorse them. So they should be eligible for some kind of insanity defense. I don't care whether it's the traditional defense. Lawyers will tell me you can't really do that. Fine, well then let's do something new. But they shouldn't be released. They should be confined securely, but in a separate facility. I left off the word facility. And they should be treated with Caldwell's program, right? And why would you do this? It's all about consequences, right? It's going to reduce recidivism, which means you save lives on the outside. It's also going to reduce crimes against the guards, crimes against other prisoners, right? Notice that also that if you can really understand this, you can let the other prisoners, the non-psychopaths, be released earlier. Because in the US, at least, I think the reason people want to punish people for so long is they're scared. And if you can go, but we know this is the person you want to be scared about. This other person, no. They do have the implicit attitude, and we've got data to show that they're much less likely. So it might actually lead to shorter sentences for the non-psychopaths and appropriate treatment for the psychopaths. Anyway, that's the hope.
So, thank you so much, Walter. Who has questions?
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm wondering, so the argument, as I understand it, is that people normally should have some implicit attitudes towards some moral content, and because psychopaths don't have that,
Right.
then they are candidates for an insanity defense, right? And I was thinking about the premise that there are moral attitudes, implicit moral attitudes that we should have. It seems clear to me that there's clear-cut cases. We should have an attitude against murder, for instance.
You should be reluctant to commit murder.
Yeah, effectively so, right?
Even if you knew you could get away with it, you
Yeah.
should still be.
And-
And most people are.
And not just because it is convenient for me, but because I have some affect towards it, right? I was thinking about gray cases. So cases where we have moral disagreements. Some people have very strong implicit attitudes towards that, but other people just don't. And whether that puts you in a situation where for those moral claims, you cannot integrate them in the legal system in the same way as you're doing here.
Right.
Precisely because you would need an argument to claim that everybody, at least in this state, should have these particular moral attitudes, right? I'm trying to think about an example still, but I'm pretty sure there's some gray area case around. What do you think about those cases, and how do they play with this argument you're putting forward?
I'm thinking of cases like, if abortion, which is a crime in some countries, or homosexual, activities of various sorts, sodomy, or prostitution, or pornography, or there are things like that. A lot of them having to do with sex, right? And when you get to those kinds of things, it turns out there's very little agreement. But if you take the 147 most common crimes in the United States, this was a study done by Kurzban and Robinson, 147 most common crimes, and they put them on cards, and they said, put them in order. Put these cards in order of what's worse, and move them back and forth until you've got them in the order of, this is worse than that is worse than this. It's all ordinal, notice, just ordinal. Which deserves more punishment? Was the test. Which deserves more punishment? This one deserves more than that, deserves more than that. And so it's things like, well, stealing one of them was stealing a radio out of the back of your parked car. That deserves some punishment, but not as much as stealing a lawnmower out of your garage, because now you're coming on your private property. And so they listed them up. How much agreement do you think they got in the rankings of those things? And the agreement is, there are pairs of them, right? And so do you fit the norm for putting this one above that one and that one above that one and so on?
Go ahead.
What's your guess?
My guess is that agreement drops at some point, but of course it's going to be large for the top end elements. Probably for the first 100.
Over the whole set of 147, 96% agreement. In the United States, in an international study, 92% agreement. Okay? The difference was the Americans were going, murder, give them death, right? And the people in Denmark were going, murder, give them 16 years. And so if you did it, instead of ordinally, you did it cardinally, there was massive disagreement. But in terms of the ordered ranking, it was pretty common. And so what we want is people's implicit attitudes to be, proportionate to how bad the thing is. Your implicit attitude against murder should be a lot worse than your implicit attitude against stealing a radio out of the back of a car, right? And so, you would use stuff like that. Now, a lot more work needs to be done, but that's a quick answer.
Thanks.
So, questions? I've got one in the back, then Carlos, and then Dominique.
Let's hear for basketball. I come from basketball country, so.
Well, my question has two parts. The first part is, to which extent are psychopaths' wrongs influenced by their context and culture? And if something is more perceived as a higher or increased wrong in some culture, are psychopaths that are inserted in that culture more or prone to do that wrong, or something like that? And if so, do they gain something from it? Like you talked about how they don't make moral judgments like we do, but are they doing these things because they know it's wrong and they want to trespass that, or because they just don't care? Because there might be a perception, or at least this knowledge drives some behavior. So that's my question. I don't know if I
No,
explained.
it's a very good question. I mean, in other words, does the fact that it's wrong actually attract
Yeah,
them?
that.
And we're actually working on that. Paul McKee is a grad student at Duke right now, and we're doing studies with what's called the approach avoidance task. And the nice thing is, instead of just having an attitude against it, you actually can measure their attraction towards it. But we're still piloting it in the general population. We haven't brought it to psychopaths yet. But I don't really know. It might be that some of them, at least, maybe all of them, you tell them it's wrong and they go, great, then I want to do it. It might be, but we really don't know. We really don't know. We know they do not have an aversion, but we don't know whether they do have an attraction. Good question.
So I'm wondering about the relation that there has to be between the appreciation, which I take it is some kind of affective reaction, and the judgment that gives rise to that reaction. So it can't be a judgment that the thing is wrong, because the presupposition is that you need the affection for there to be the judgment that it is wrong. There's a kind of internalism about the judgment
About
that it is wrong.
appreciation, yeah.
But also about the judgment that it is wrong, because it says that they don't really make moral judgments.
Well, so remember, do I know that E equals MC squared? Yes, I know that E equals MC squared. I believe the physicist. But
So that's
I
the
don't
appreciation.
appreciate it.
That's the appreciation.
But I don't appreciate it because I don't know how to apply it and use it in various theories and so on. And so they might know that it's wrong in the sense that the physicists say so.
Yeah, exactly. But
And they
that's
might
not
know
a
it's wrong in the
normative
sense that the Catholics say so, or most people around me say so. Yeah.
But that's not a moral judgment.
Right. I'm saying that's why they don't make them.
Yeah. So there's an internalism.
But there's
about
a sense in which they utter a sentence which is a moral judgment. Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't make the judgment.
They don't really appreciate it.
They
Yeah.
they
They might
formulate-
believe it. I believe that E equals MC squared, but they don't appreciate it. Right.
I was taking you to say that they don't make the judgment right there. So I was taking you to defend the idea that moral judgment has some kind of cognitive component and some kind of
Yes.
cognitive component,
Yes.
where the cognitive component is the affection.
Yeah.
And the cognitive component, the affection, gives you the appreciation of, and if the appreciation isn't there, then there isn't a moral judgment.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, my conclusion slide, I made it, it's too short. It's
Yeah, yeah.
kind of misleading there. Yeah.
And so the sort of like the other part, the cognitive part, that has to be a judgment about. I mean, I guess there are two things that we could say. It's a judgment about what people judge to be morally wrong or morally right. So it's a judgment about opinions.
Yeah. That's the inverted commas. Yeah.
Or it could be a judgment about the features that make an act wrong. Say, for example, the suffering or.
But which judgment about that? I mean, if they're raping someone, I know she is suffering.
Yeah.
They just don't. They're not making the judgment that that is bad.
Sure, but that is the thing that. So that would be the cognitive component that gives rise to the affection in the case where there is a genuine moral judgment, and that doesn't give rise to the affection in the case where it's a psychopath.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to have a clear mind of sort of like the picture of the judgment itself.
Yeah.
I just wanted to have a clear view
Yeah.
about that.
They make the judgments about the facts of the case and about what other people think.
And it's the features that make the act wrong. It's not just that other people take it to be wrong. So there is a sensitivity to the features that make up wrongness, which is interesting because you might think that's what's crucial for responsibility.
So they're aware, for example, I remember what I said about empathy. This psychopath was aware that the other person was suffering.
Yeah.
Right? And they said, and then they were told, well, you're a psychopath because you don't care about them. And they go, yeah, like, why would I care?
Yeah.
And so it's not that they're unaware of the suffering, right? They just don't care about it. They don't appreciate why shouldn't I hurt this person? They've got money and I want it. So they don't take that to be a reason.
Yeah, but they're able to track those features.
They're able to track those features, yes. And don't let them into this nice community of people with Alzheimer's who look so happy. Like, don't let these people in.
No, there. Well, my question is actually a bit of a clarification related to your conclusions and Cadwell's treatment. I was wondering if, well, as you say, they should be eligible for insanity defense as be confined in a separate place. But because you added this Cadwell's treatment, I'm very interested in the idea, if it's ever possible, rehabilitation through Cadwell's treatment. Because, sure, if they made a criminal act and they should be secure in these areas, but if there is a way that treatment can lower it, maybe someday
treatment can be what?
Can lower the
psychopathy score.
Yeah. If rehabilitation is anywhere in the discussion, or it's no way.
People ask that very question, and nobody really knows. But my impression, at least, is that the treatment does not make them feel empathy.
No.
It does not, and so it's not going to affect their psychopathy. What it does is it says, even if you're a psychopath, you want to do this because you'll get to play ping pong.
It will adapt them better to a society, or...
Yeah, you'll be able to get along with society, and you're not going to end up in jail again. Right. And, they don't want to end up in jail.
Yeah, my question is not that a psychopathy can be cured. It's more like, can they still be psychopath and live within society with, for example, a treatment like that?
I think they can, but only with very close oversight.
Okay.
I'm in favor of ankle bracelets. I don't understand why people don't have GPS ankle bracelet, anklets. It's not that big a deal, and we know exactly where you are. So, and that if you do anything wrong, we'll be able to tell you. Mm-hmm. They use them for sexual predators in the U.S., but they don't use them for psychopaths. There are various ways in which you can monitor them and make it relatively safe. Now, try to convince the general public of this. That's another story.
I'm talking like ideals now. Yeah.
¿No había nadie antes? No había nadie antes. Okay.
And we're about to run out of time. So maybe we've got time for one more question.
Okay, perfect.
I'll be quick.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really interesting. I have two questions, but I'll do just one then. I understand that this is specific for psychopaths, but I was just wondering if not making the moral judgment, but only pretending to do so, that is, not appreciating the wrongness of the act, does that always reduce some sort of responsibility for your act, for your wrongdoing, or is it only for in the case for psychopathy?
I think it always does.
It always
The other
does.
example is the 5-year-old kid who says, "I hate you, Daddy." He doesn't really appreciate what he's doing. And so I don't
But-
hold him responsible.
But for example, in the case of
But he knows it makes me feel bad. He knows that. That's why he says, "I hate you, Daddy."
But for example, in the case of race, I'm thinking of a particular case of racism.
Yeah.
I guess if someone that kills a person that from a racialized group, and then somebody that, and because they feel that killing somebody that is from a different social group or a different racial group is less bad, or they don't appreciate it as bad as killing somebody from their same racial group.
Right.
So in that case, do you think that lack of appreciation reduces their responsibility?
So there are two views on that.
Okay.
I'll tell you first the one that I'm inclined towards, which is it matters whether you're able to appreciate it. I didn't put that in, and so your question makes me add a good clarification, which is if this really is a genetic disorder that made the cells malformed in their paralimbic system so that they cannot feel empathy or remorse or those things, then it reduces their responsibility. Now, for this other person who, say, was raised with the Ku Klux Klan,
Yeah, exactly.
they don't have a genetic disorder. And so it, in some sense of they can, care about other people. They just don't. And so I want to hold them responsible. Now, I know that some people are going to say, but it's going to be a lot harder for them, given their culture, given the way they were raised. And so you might want to say they're not as responsible as somebody who didn't have so much pressure on them, and that would be my kind of view. But the other view would be, they actually do appreciate it's wrong, and we're going to hold them responsible, just like. Or I guess there's a third view, which is for society's sake, we've got to hold them, because it's not like we can put racists into a separate facility. Every prisoner would go in that separate facility. And so from a practical point of view, the solutions wouldn't apply. But good question. I'm not sure which way to go there.
Thank you, Walter. I have two really short questions. The first one is I am thinking in the distinction between immoral people and amoral people. So I don't know if what you think about psychopaths being immoral or if the psychopaths are amoral, meaning that if they have a broken moral compass, or if they don't have any moral compass at all. And the other question is that if the reason, well,
let me answer that one quickly, because I don't think they have a moral compass. Their only moral compass is listening to other people and finding out how to manipulate them by using what the other people say.
Good, because my next question is that if the reason why they don't really know that something is wrong is because they cannot form moral beliefs, so they are not sensitive to moral reasons. And if they are not sensitive to moral reasons at all, so they don't have any moral stance towards the world, how can we judge someone that is not only acting wrong, but they are morally dead? They don't have any type of moral attitude towards the world, no moral stance.
So we're going to have to talk about what counts as a belief in order to determine whether they have beliefs, because they might have beliefs in the sense that I believe that equals MC squared. I don't even understand what it means, but I believe it's true. And so they might have kind of a minimal belief, of that sort. But there's also some indication that they have beliefs beyond that. So for example, if you ask them questions on, moral scenarios, they'll give you answers. And then you ask them why, and they'll defend the answers. As a matter of fact, you know the ultimatum game? So the ultimatum game is, you give me $20, right? And then I can give part of that to Federico. And if he accepts my offer, then he gets what I gave him and I get what I gave. But if he rejects my offer, then he doesn't get what I gave him and I don't get, so we both get nothing. So we both lose. So economists always say, look, let me make it 10 instead of 20 just for simplicity. So if 10, and then I give him 1, right? Well, if he says no, then he loses $1. And why? And so economists go, he ought to take the $1, right? Not all economists, but many economists. But, people who believe in equality, they'll give 5, and then we end up with 5 and and so, and then he would accept it. But what about 3? What about 2? What about 4? How much would you accept? Psychopaths reject more offers than non-psychopaths. And when asked why, they said, it's not fair. Now, of course, what they mean is it's not fair to me, right? Because I'm offering I was only offered $4 out of 10. I deserved 8, right? Or it ought to be 5. They reject more. So there's some sense in which they might have some moral judgments, right? The other story, and then, as you know, I love anecdotes. And so that was an actual study with multiple. It's also true that in some prisons have reported that when a pedophile comes into an American prison, the psychopaths are the first to kill them. Because they go, that's disgusting. You shouldn't have sex with young kids like that. That's just wrong. And so they kill them. That's what psychopaths do. And so they kill him. And then in one case, they asked why. And he said, well, because it's disgusting. And they said, but you raped and killed 3 women. And he goes, that's different. So they might have selective moral judgments and not others. Now, do they appreciate those moral judgments? Or are they simply saying, I'm going to reject the offer of 4 because I don't want to be on the losing end next time, and I'm trying to establish my status in the community. Or what exactly is going on? I don't know. But there's not a simple answer to whether they have moral beliefs or not.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are out of time, but we can continue to talk about this after the talk. So thank you so much, Walter.
Thank you. And thanks again to Federico for organizing.